Hi folks, this is International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to provide a forum for you guys to ask questions. If you have any chess students or anything like that, or know any teachers, this is a chance to get a little bit of a free lesson. You can ask any question. The best way to do this is during the week, to ask the questions in advance. Those tend to be better questions. Or if you're tuning in live right now to ICC on YouTube, you will see a chat channel on the right, and I see I've got a hi already, and that will be available for asking questions live, which we've had a lot of fun with. You can also comment to each other live. You don't have to be asking me a specific question, or you can try to correct something I say or add to something I say. A lot of times you guys know as much as I do about the questions being asked. So I'll generally give priority to questions that are asked beforehand. I've got a bunch of those prepared this week as usual, or at least I'm ready to, I think I should put them up there. But on the other hand, I'll try to keep track of the chat. Just be a little patient because I have to look over there to see them and realize they're even there. So here are the ways to submit questions in advance. The first and best way to do it, really by far, is to send a question to my email address, askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. It's the ICC URL. And I will get to those right away. We also have a Twitter channel, which isn't being used much, but has actually been used, which is hashtag AskIamWatson. You can put a question there, or you can send me a question to my ICC handle. A few people have done this. My ICC handle is John L. Watson, L as in lion, one word, JOHN LWATSON. And that's fine too. And of course, you don't have to be an ICC member to be watching this show, as you may have noticed. If you aren't one, you just have to get onto YouTube and be signed in to use the chat if you want to ask something. So that, and you can go back to previous shows to get anything, more details about that whole process and about what topics you might want to ask about. The usual ones are openings are extremely popular. I'm kind of an opening expert, but also there's history, strategy, current events, current chess events, books, all kinds of videos, all kinds of stuff. You can ask me anything and we'll give it a whirl. And if I can't answer it, probably someone in the chat channel will be able to. Okay, and also I should mention again that the new indices of the openings are up. That lists the openings that are discussed on this show, that have been discussed on this show since the very beginning. So we've got about 20 or 21 of those listed, 21 shows listed, and they're below each YouTube show. Once it's archived, you'll see those lists, but also I've added a post with a complete list to my Facebook page, John L. Watson, that's 3 words, and I'll be updating that every week. So now, as usual, I'm going to be getting to questions that I've been sent before, and I'm going to and things that have been in the chat before that I haven't gotten to. So that's, and also I'll have some corrections usually about what I've talked about before. So the first thing is I noticed that players or viewers in the chat box are really aware of recent trends more than I am sometimes, especially in the Sicilian defense. So I got this question about an early knight b3 in the Sicilian, and I wasn't aware at all that it's starting to be used by some pretty good players and discussed all over the place. I did a little research and I went, oh, okay, this is becoming a serious idea. So I thought, instead of, I can't answer it completely because it's too broad an issue, but I thought I would just put up a game. And here's Onashuk and Atabayev from 2013. Now, there have been a lot of recent games, but this one seemed to be appropriate to just sort of get into the discussion of this and sort of talk about this for a second. Now, this is the Najdorf version of this opening. For example, I already mentioned that on the dragon version, where you play this move, that's knight b3 early on the 6th move. You could always wait a move or two. And that's a known line, and it's actually pretty interesting for white because you've got an English defense reversed, which is actually a dragon reversed, double reversed. And so we're back to a dragon in a sense, but with white having an extra tempo over the famous English opening counter. So, and we talked about that, I think, a couple weeks ago. So that's that. But this is the more interesting to me, something I had never seen before, actually, which was this this idea of playing it against the Najdorf. There's the Najdorf, and now the question is knight b3. This is an interesting move. It seems a little bit funny to move out of the way. I think one way to look at this is that even though the knight on d4 collaborates in all these huge attacks, if you get them, if you don't get them, it's often a target. It's something that loses time to either the move knight e5, in the Najdorf in particular, e5 is often the next move. And on top of that, it can be attacked with knight here or bishop here or queen here, these kinds of things. Often it has to move back to b3 anyway. So along with that general chess principle of making the moves that you're going to make anyway, first, before you commit to other moves, white tries this move knight b3. That doesn't mean it's exclamation point or anything, but at least it's very interesting. And as I say, I wasn't aware that this was kind of a big line these days. Now, again, this is a reversed dragon with a sort of Dragdorfy move, a6. And if you want to find out about that, you should look up the English opening lines, or well, just look this up directly, and then you might compare them with the English opening lines where you're a tempo ahead as white. And I think actually white can have a lot of fun in these lines just because he is a tempo ahead and does pretty decently anyway against these systems. So we talked about that already, so I won't. You can go back into previous shows, I think just a couple weeks ago, to look at that. And in this game he plays this move, and it turns out that's sort of what white's looking for. White's thinking about the fact that in this position black can play two different kinds of systems, e5 and e6, and we've talked about that before too. And e6 is extremely popular, obviously, in the Najdorf lines. So one thing he's trying to do is meet e6 without having made an extra move and now be able to play the move g4. This is kind of an odd thing, but it turns out that having the knight back here as opposed to having the bishop committed to some square means that there's more flexibility for white. That doesn't mean it's better for white than any other position, but it's different. And what else can black do? We talked about g6, the Dragdorf. A very interesting move is this. And I actually didn't find many games. Well, I found games with this, and white kept playing this move to sort of cover the queen, stop b5 basically. And I think a good answer is simply b6, and then white develops and black attacks the e-pawn and white plays there, and then black can go into sort of a hedgehoggy kind of thing with these kinds of moves, and the knight b3 is not that impressive against the hedgehog. It's okay, it's reasonable. Both sides have interesting play. And black can also conceivably play this kind of move, just go here with a double fianchetto, and that should be okay too. But they're both interesting for white, so you might want to play this anyway. I mean, it'd be fun to play these things for either color. In fact, well, I could show you some setups, but I don't think it's that important because the key thing is, well, what's happening here if white just plays normally here? For example, this move, which is sort of his intention. It's what he plays in this game. If he plays with this move, which is what he plays in this game, after e6, because after all, that's kind of the point of knight b3 in a sense, is to throw this move g4 in early. And but here, I don't think it works all that well. It's okay, but it's not ideal. And there are a couple ways to play this. One is here, and then after being attacked, it looks like the knight has nowhere to go, but you've got this move. And then there are a variety of exchanges happens. I think this is about equal, but it's interesting for both sides. And the other way that black can do this is to play just here, stopping g5. And normally white's fairly happy with that because he plays here. But now black has a very interesting move, just b5, not wasting any time, because otherwise white's getting what he wants. He's going to get an early h4 and g5 in. Sorry, bad arrows there. h4 and g5 is kind of white's plan when he plays this knight b3, g4 idea. And now that the rook's protected, then after g5, after taking and taking, you don't have to worry about losing that rook. So amazingly enough, black can simply play here, though. And white plays here, seemingly winning some material. But black plays here with a huge counterattack. In fact, black's already, I think, better, because if white plays here now, black simply plays here and is attacking the queen and is attacking the bishop. And the light squares are all falling, which is particularly awful. That may not be the perfect sequence, but still, it's a good line for black. So b5 seems to equalize, because once you get b5 and in bishop b7, you're probably going to be okay. Typical Najdorf kind of thing. And white's okay too. This is a game. There's nothing wrong with this, but I think white probably would prefer not to play g4 against this particular move. Probably a4 is a better move, or maybe there's options. I haven't really looked at a lot of things. You could just play a slow move maybe. All right, so in this game, however, something different happens, which is that move. And supposedly the idea of this whole line now is to play g4 now that there's nothing attacking here. So knight b3 is almost like a waiting move in some sense, because he wants to play g4, but he obviously can't do it here because black has two pieces on it. So he plays this first. And give me 1 second here, having some technical feedback issues here. See if I can get rid of those. I think I got rid of those. So white goes ahead and plays this g4 move, and black just develops. And just to show you what the ideas are for white, and now white plays here. I'm not actually sure of that move. Oddly enough, it looks totally natural. Same sort of idea, g5, h4, those kinds of moves. But I think in retrospect, maybe this is a little more accurate, just to get castled queenside as fast as possible. There is one issue with that. Probably white was a little worried about that move, because after here and here, it looks like white has no ideas here. But in fact, white can still play something like this, because the point is that if black takes here, white wins that d pawn, which is probably more important than the g pawn here. Those are some pretty important dark squares that white just won. It's a complicated position, but I think I prefer white here. Maybe no big deal for black, and black doesn't have to take the g pawn either, but still, this is certainly a thought. That's how you might meet h5 anyway. And otherwise, what would happen here? Maybe just a simple move, but now you get that thing you've been trying to get all along, which is g5 cramping white's position. And in this case, you have even an extra option here, which I think is kind of cool. Getting out of the way of castling queenside, and this is promising for white. At least it has nice attacking chances, and justifies the whole idea of playing knight b3 early. It doesn't mean you're necessarily better, but it's at least fun. Okay, so in the game he played here. I shouldn't go into too much detail here because this is a previous chat question, but still. And white plays there, and that's a bad sign because he really wants to play this g5, h4 kind of idea, but now just figures that it's too slow. So, for example, let me see, after this and this is attacked, and after that, I believe already that black is getting h6 in. Yeah, I think that's true. That's quite a good move actually, because he's breaking up that entire side of the board, and after this move, then you'll find that this is hanging. And black's just getting this bishop doesn't look all that great here. Black's gotten well developed because white's taken a little extra time to play that move back, and so black should be absolutely fine here. Not that it's terrible, but that's why he doesn't play that. Instead, he plays here, which is a little loosening. On the other hand, at least white's got a nice. Now he has the idea of playing here, or maybe in some cases this move. And black plays here, an oddball move to win the dark squares, a thematic move. The idea is to make this bishop look really bad by winning these squares. It doesn't work all that well. So I think better was just very simply this. And I'm not even sure if white has much of a plan here. If white does play this move, it's actually just a mistake because of takes, opening the H file. And then now you're attacking this pawn. And white's usual trick in a position like this is this, which has a couple points. One thing is if he takes it, usually there's a knight takes e6. But in any case, taking would be really weakening, but the problem is this move, and white actually can get mated very easily here. This is awful. This is actually losing for white. So if you can't play g6, then what's left? Because everything else is just too weakening and too slow. Black's managed to get developed really quickly, and white's that move in knight b3 now starts to look a little bit wasted, because after a move like that, for example, black has this outpost. There's no f4 to kick him out, so just a move like that. And black has an ideal Sicilian position. It's not that good. It's white's in the game, but we're not happy, basically. So in the game, black got more exotic and played this move, and white answered very smartly with this move. Otherwise, black's move would have been very nice. And still black's okay here, but it turns out white has chances. Now, that's very odd. You'd think that would obviously be the best move, but it turns out probably taking this first creates some real weaknesses. Isolated pawn, isolated pawn. Now he gets his pawn back with that move, and now it turns out knights are stronger than bishops. Why? Look at that square that was created by bishop takes c6 check. Look at that square and look at that square. And now maybe even that knight can be kicked and the bishop can come into all kinds of beautiful squares. Not that this is that big an advantage, by the way. It's just because two bishops are always so good no matter how bad they look. Two bishops are wonderful in chess. Nevertheless, white is somewhat better here. This is what he should have played. He did win. He won after these moves, and I don't think I'll go into any detail. It just was very messy. White had maybe the tiniest advantage in this position and managed to win, but black should have been okay. But still, white has better practical chances, I guess, because of these weaknesses. Bit of a problem, but not a serious one, because black has nice activity in a lot of lines too. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted to catch you guys up on. And let me see. Okay, here's a chat. Let me at least get back to you. Oh, Para Eric is back. Hello. And how do you feel about the double fianchetto in general? Very, very general question. I've played it a lot. I've played double fianchettos before. I think they're very established in the modern game of chess. They still aren't a majority choice, because if you double fianchetto, you're usually letting your opponent get the center in one way or another. So you have to kind of pick your spots to play a double fianchetto. On the other hand, the bishops are well placed. You've lost a little time making extra moves with g3 or g6 or b6 or b3. So you'd almost have to ask about a specific kind of double fianchetto. If black plays double fianchetto right off, let me bring up a new game to cover what I'm going to do next, and then I will put those moves on that board. Yeah, here's another question I was asked, so I'm going to throw this in. We have infinite numbers of things to look at today, but we'll get to them over the next couple of weeks no matter what. Mostly old questions, and I have to apologize for people where I just can't get to everything. This is a game, but we're not going to look at this. We're going to just look at double. Oh, I was just going to say the double fianchetto that maybe isn't so great. Let's just make a move for white. I don't know any of these moves, knight here or something. These are a little too slow, I think, for black. White can almost get away with this kind of thing. Black's you don't have enough space. So the double fianchetto should come when white's making certain kinds of moves, like in the English opening or something, where you can actually get away with this kind of thing because white's moves are sort of slow. Probably not the greatest example, but these kinds of things can be played more safely. Maybe with c5, for example. There's a standard double fianchetto line that's played a lot, actually, in symmetrical, and can come up by various move orders. For white, of course, you can get away with it more often, but then you don't necessarily get much of a chance to, you don't get much space, and you don't get much initiative. So the double fianchetto is fine, and it's fun, but it's not really, I'd say in most openings, it's not really an attempt to get an advantage. It's more of an attempt to just get your pieces out and play. Okay, then we have, what do you think of double Seven Deadly Chess Sins? I already mentioned that I like that, especially for its psychological insights. It's a terrific book. He's a great writer, albeit a bit strange. You know, we still have our interviews up with Jonathan Rowson, the ones in the archive on ICC, where I gave him a couple of interviews, and they were some of the best interviews I gave that anybody participated in, because it was his doing that it was so good. So you should maybe check those out. They're in the archive, for my archive. It's the old Chess Talk show with John Watson, so you just have to go back towards the beginning, and you'll see I gave him an interview, and it was so great that we just continued it and extended it and made it a double interview. And he gave one terrific problem for the developing player, sort of almost a test that I think Dvoretsky had given him. And I still remember that to this day, how influential and how impressive that was. Now, let me keep going, because I have a bunch of stuff, really way too many things. I was asked about the Zurich variation of the Nimzo-Indian, and I promised I'd give some kind of reply. This is such an old and established line that it's impossible to really survey it or anything, but I thought I'd show you something, in this case something that maybe is a way for white to play, but also shows some of black's ideas. I'm not going to do a survey at all. I'm just going to show you this one game between Geary and Beleski. That's the Zurich variation. Queen c2 in the Nimzo is extremely popular, probably the first or second most popular move, besides maybe e3. And one way for black to play against this is called the Zurich variation, attacking here. And it's a very established line. Christopher Siliki, in his Nimzo-Indian, Bogo-Indian book, his repertoire book, suggests knight c6 and gives a lot of detail. So if you want to know something about this, then it's a good idea to it's something you might really like to look at, is that particular, the suggestions in that book. Okay, white plays here, and by the way, there's other orders this can happen in, but basically you get to this position and black usually plays there. Now there are options, that's the problem. You can't really talk about this in general because black has some really radically different ways to play it. But the old traditional way is to play this, and the idea is you're probably going to give up this bishop, and then you're going to play for e5 to get this bishop out, and that'll be your good bishop, whereas the pawns will be on e4. Let's just make a move or two. Okay, now here's a line I wanted to show you. Now one of the older lines is this, and maybe white has a tiny advantage, but I think black's usually pretty happy here just because white's used a fair amount of time. And black will break in the center. He'll have a good bishop left, not his bad bishop, because after he plays e5, that would have been a bad bishop. And white has a bishop pair, which is incredibly nice, but at the same time has wasted some time, and black's pieces are all going to be well placed, is the idea, in return for white's two bishops. So let me go back. In this game, instead, he played this move. This is Geary, who knows what he's doing. And black castles, and white plays here now to make sure he gets the two bishops. And black plays for this idea of e5, e4. The difference here is the queen is well placed on the light squares, and the bishop is well placed on the long diagonal. On the other hand, white's taken a lot of time to get to this position. Okay, that's a key thing. In the old days, we used to all play that move. That was a very common move. And after black played here, black would usually play here. And now I still think white probably has a little something in this position. If I remember right, you play either b4 first or maybe even knight here, with the idea of playing bishop here, and maybe c5 is a move too that's going to come pretty soon. Black usually tries to break back with this move, because if he sits around, then the two bishops will express themselves. It's that principle we've talked about a lot, which is that the bishops are slowly developing pieces. The bishops will win the end game for you, and they'll win middle games if they get a long chance to express themselves. But at when black first gets the knights, he better break open the position. I think this is the only decent move in this position. I still think white might be a little better here. Well, one interesting thing is sometimes you can make this weird little double pawn move, attacking the pawn chain sort of in traditional fashion. And I'm not sure what the theory on that is now. It might be almost equal actually, but white also can play more slowly. So let's see what happened in the game here. Okay, so he plays that move instead, much more ambitious because it weakens this square a little bit and means that black's got a more black's got a fixed pawn structure to work with for the knights, which means this bishop isn't as good either. The bishop doesn't have any scope. On the other hand, he has two bishops in space, and no weaknesses, which is a really big traditional advantage. So white, you almost feel like, has to be a little better here. And the bishop will eventually get out. That's the story with bishops. Okay, now that's a great little move, though. I like that move. This is this Belezki playing Geary. The problem is if you play normally, the normal idea is to play here and maybe try to play something like this and this, or knight here and here. But that's a little slow because of this counterattack. I think that's the real issue here, or even knight d2 first and then maybe c5 at some point. So in this game he plays this funny looking move with the idea of playing knight f4, and you'd think, well, that's a little slow. And Geary plays here, trying to exploit it tactically, and black plays back. And this turned into a very interesting game after in this position. And white had space, and I got an attack and won the game, but mainly because he was Geary. This may be okay for black, but it's not ideal. But what he should have done is just play here, and then I think he's perfectly okay, threatening this and threatening here. And that's obvious. Obviously, he looked at that and thought, well, he's going to be too far behind in development or something. But it turns out this is just fine for black. For example, this is a key move, cutting that bishop off so that the g-file doesn't really hurt you in a position like this. And that's fine for black. No real problems. Even though he's way behind in development, there's no way to attack here. And positionally, of course, black is very well off because that's such a bad piece. It's only equal, but I mean, in my opinion. But so that's interesting that worked. I think, though, that white can just play here, keep some sort of small advantage. Black is probably going to play here. Otherwise, white's just getting castled and breaking in the center. There's also still this idea of playing knight e5, right? So now here, that's kind of the key move, looking at the f5 square and attacking this knight, and that's the best answer as it turns out. And then white can do a lot of things, but he can also just pop right in there and say, look, I'm a little better here. I have the bishop pair, I have ideas of going like this, and I have a little bit of space. But it's still a very interesting position. This black's actually, I don't think it's equal. I think it's playable for black. But the two bishops are such a force that in the end I'd rather be white here. Anyway, just a little game to show you some ideas in the Zurich variation. Thought people might be interesting. It's definitely worth taking up for black. There's ways to improve. There's so many options. You'll always have ways of playing it. On the other hand, I tend to think white's just a slight bit better in every line, and that that's what chess is about when you play a little slowly. Knight c6 is a little bit slow. It doesn't break open any lines or anything. All right, so let's see what we have here. When do you think the bishops became so highly valued in chess theory? Well, the Russians caught on really early. Somewhere around Botvinnik's time, they just suddenly... It's interesting that Chigorin, who's always famous for proposing the knights, and he played the Chigorin defense, which has all these... I was asked a question about that also, where knights are so important. The knight pair is so important, but Chigorin himself loved the bishops. So even back then, way back in the 19th century, there were people who preferred the bishops. Steinitz, I think, preferred the bishops. But it's interesting that for years it was debated, and some people even said the knights were stronger than the bishops, and even very good players said that the knights were. And then at some point, I think about certainly the 30s it changed because of the Soviet players. By the 40s and 50s it's becoming obvious, and by the 50s everybody knows the bishops are better pretty much. There are a few holdouts maybe, but of course it's completely dependent on the position. I think one thing is people started realizing, gee, if you just get to an endgame, my bishops are going to win almost just so many different kinds of endings, and in particular, of course, when there are pawns on both sides of the board, which there usually are. So just get organized here a little bit. No, it wasn't always recognized, but I would say that, as I say, maybe by the 1950s or so, maybe it took a while, in theory books in particular. Good question. Okay, so what do we have here? We have, I want to just keep, here's an old question about the two knights defense, which I've had around for ages, but I never got to, and I thought it would be kind of fun. I'm not going to do a ton of theory, but it's such a theoretical line, we're going to have to do a little bit, or at least a theoretical survey, without going into any details. It's this variation. The question was, why is 8 bishop d3 so popular in the two knights variation? Isn't it an anti-positional move? And I thought everybody would be interested in this because there's so many people who play e4, e5 on both sides. So okay, there we are. We're talking about the two knights defense, and white tries the most ambitious line. And now remember we looked at this, and then we looked at it again briefly the next week, I think. We looked at this, and of course we found out that that was a particularly strong move, but also there was simply the fried liver attack. But we didn't really talk about anything else yet. And there are other moves. For example, there's this clever little move, which has the idea of here takes, takes this way, and with a lot of space and initiative. And there's the similar line here and if here playing here, to try and get a lot for the pawn, and sometimes you're not even a pawn down, and there's tendency for that to happen. I'm not going to go into any detail, but this is a famous line, for example, the famous Hans Berliner game as black. I think white's better in these lines if he knows exactly what he's doing, but it goes on forever and ever and ever. The main line over the centuries, though, has been this. I don't know what there must be, 30,000 games with this or something. It's just ridiculous. And white usually checks. Seems to me, is this the line? Yeah, this is where Bronstein once played to give up a piece in this way, and then I think queen d4 or something, just to show you how crazy chess is, and won the game. I think it was Bronstein. Anyway, Reumann was black, maybe, a million years ago. So you can always look at that. I used to think I would play that. I had that prepared to play with white. I'm glad I never got a chance to play it because it's probably horrible, but when I was a kid, I would play everything. So the main line by far is to play this move, bishop e5 check. And now Eric Schiller and I for years talked about playing this move as black, and we thought black could equalize. I'm still not convinced black can't maybe equalize there. Maybe it's a little bit dull, but I never quite saw anybody convincingly show how white was better there. And I've looked at even one recent article, but I'm just not, it's a possibility. Anyway, 99% of the time they play this move instead. And white takes it, obviously, and then black takes back. And now here's this key position where white plays this move, bishop d3, which is what the question's about. And let me just see if there's anything else in the chat. Nope. Bishop d3 is a crazy move, right? Because it stops you from moving the d-pawn and getting your bishop out. The most fundamental thing that you do in double e-pawn openings is to move the d-pawn and get your pieces out quickly. But what you have to do, I guess, is look at what the alternatives are to really understand this. I mean, you have to look at the specifics, but also at what the alternatives are. If you move this way, um, it's away from the king side, and that's always been considered, at the very best, extremely dangerous. And after this move, just simple move like that. And there's moves like queen d4 with tempo sometimes, and there's all kinds of problems here. Um, so bishop a4 is never really considered very seriously. There's this move, now bishop e2 is the main move. There's also this move queen f3, and I don't know about going into any detail there. I think the best move against that, people have played this for a while. I used to think that was a good move. I guess white might be getting some small advantage. This was revived a little bit recently, but I think that's the easiest way to play against it. And I can't really do any detail here, but this particular line has been very friendly to white. Simply develop, left to black. Simply develop. Don't worry about anything else. Just develop here. Just castle. And white is 2 pawns ahead, but look at this development, and look at the center, and this piece is sort of hanging out there. And the specifics just seem to work out very well for black. I mean, he has all kinds of ideas. This is one of his ideas, and I think it's not only a tough position, but it's because there's a lot of those in this queen f3 line where white actually, with good defense, sneaks out. This is one where I don't think good defense helps that much. He might be able to equalize, but it's at best. So basically, I think the takes line is not very good. And was I going to say anything else about this? I can't go into super detail here. Probably bishop d3 is the best move, and then just castles. And so we get another bishop d3 line that's worth taking a look at. I think you'll find black's fine in these kinds of positions. And here again, I think you can just play knight d5, yeah, because you have f5 ideas. Now this has been played in maybe hundreds of games, probably at least. So white can play this way and black can play this way, and it might be worth looking at. If you know it better than your opponent, you'll probably get some pretty quick wins. But you can see the idea here. You're only a pawn down as black, and you've got ideas of f5 and e4. Now it turns out white's fine here, so I'm not going to try and make it, if we got this move, right, just covering the f5 square. And after all, you are a pawn ahead, and it's not as though these pieces are great shakes, right? The pawn's bad on c6, and the knight on a5 looks silly. But black does have compensation here. I think I pretty much can guarantee that. Okay, so that's queen f3. So the question is about this move. Okay, and so the traditional move is bishop here. And then just for the record, this is with knight h3 has been there's maybe 1,000 games with that, but it's in the end it's fine for black. You have to just look up the theory. And the traditional move has been this, here, and now black has all kinds of moves that he's played all kinds of things here, but the one that has always bothered me the most is this, and I'd be very surprised if white can get an advantage here. I'm almost certain that he can't get an advantage in this position. But I'd have to prove that. That's a famous long line. For example, often this will happen, and black will take. Oh wait, I'm sorry, is this right? No, because I'm on that. What am I thinking of? Oh, c3 kind of moves. But then there's things like here, and if there, and you just retreat, and it's really hard for black to get organized. There can be a rook on d8, a bishop on f5, and the king side's hard. It's hard to get castled without an attack. And I think you'll find these positions are just fine for black. But they have to be learned, and a lot of people say they're okay for white too. So they're certainly still being played for both sides, so that's always a good sign. So in the game, we saw this move. Okay, bishop d3. And I'm not going to analyze this in any depth, but I think the problem with this move, and it's a good move. Okay, the question was, why is it a good move? Well, it stops e4, and all the alternatives have disadvantages. For example, now after h6, you don't have to go here and get hit with e4. You can go back to this square. And there have been countless games with this, and I think white's doing pretty well in this exact position. White's got a very small advantage in this position. That maybe, if he plays perfectly. But there's tons of games, and it's very interesting. But it's a nice, interesting, different way for white to play. That's why he plays this way, with some chances for advantage. The score in this line hasn't been that bad. I think the real problem is this move. That's the one that bothers me most. And then you can play this strange move here. I mean, it's a very oddball move here, and then come back again with the idea of g3, for example. And black tends to play here. It's complicated, but I think black's okay. But there's plenty of things to do here. And then the other thing you can do is what most people do in this position, which is simply come back. And now black can play knight f4. And arguably it might even be, well, It's just a mess. I'm not going to try and make any more comments on that. That's one of the moves, but it's more common, I think. I think I can safely say that it's more common to play this move first, and then think about knight f4, for example, right now. And there's all kinds of things to do here. Now, usually white allows you to take on that square, and people have won both sides of that. Sam Shanklin won a nice game with white in this kind of line. But, and I guess, yeah, that's if white castles. Did I get that right? I guess I wanted to play this one move before bishop d6. Excuse me. Yeah, I wanted to play it. Did I? Yeah. Oh, you can play it right away, but you can also play this way first. And then, for example, this can happen, and you get that kind of position, which is just crazy, isn't it? This bishop is terrible right now because it's so blocked off. Well, but white is a pawn up and has a gorgeous outpost there. That's weak on an open file, and eventually a rook will get there. And the knight's misplaced. From white's point of view, he has the most horrible central position you'll ever see, and the bishop's completely wedged in. And his pawn isn't worth much right now. So one possible one game that I looked at went like this. I think bishop c7 is a very good move, by the way, and so is this move. Just getting some more space for black. He doesn't care too much about pawns. He cares about the fact that he's getting his pieces activated really quickly. And in this game he went there, and then he ended up taking here. And I think black, I'd rather be black here. I think he's still a pawn down, but he has great activity in two bishops. On the other hand, white, the game may have been drawn because white still has this nice outpost. He is a pawn ahead. And this knight is still terrible. So anyway, that's a quick survey, but it sort of shows you why white might want to play bishop d3, just because the alternatives are so in such good shape for black theoretically, and this can go any which way, as you can see. It's just a crazy move where both sides have a lot of options. All right, now, so that's a little bit, I'm going back over old questions still, and that's one on that. Wow, time disappears. And I have a couple really interesting new questions, but I might want to switch because I have to go into some detail about those. Oh yeah, we want to get to, oh, there's the old London question too. We have all kinds of things to get to that we've talked about before. Should we take a break with chat things here? We don't really have any more chat questions right now. Please throw yourself in there. I might as well continue then. Let me show you. This is a great question I got about the Czech Benoni. It's this, and it's playing this move first. So the question is, what about this move order? Here, here, here. That's the first question. And he also asks about, what about this move? It's so funny because I really dismissed the second one right away, and I've gotten completely fascinated by it. But having really thought about it, looked it up and thought about it. So the first question is, what about the move d5, which is the normal move in here? And the idea is to get to a Czech Benoni, some sort of normal Czech Benoni kind of position, maybe like, I don't know, like this and this and this. Or you might even skip knight f6 for a while in this order. Here's how the Czech Benoni usually goes, and I'll show you that there's a reason for this. The reason that this is how you usually get to the Czech Benoni. Here, you play a Benoni, but now instead of playing the modern Benoni or some other variant with g6, you just play here. And white usually plays here. And the setup is bishop e7, castles, and then there's all kinds of clever things you can do, a lot of times involving trying to get your bishop out to g5, or maybe a knight comes over to these kinds of squares. You don't always even castle, come to think of it, I should mention that. So it's a wonderful thing that's gotten a certain amount of popularity. It's never been unpopular. It's never been super popular, but it's never been unpopular. So it's the kind of thing that you'll always run into once in a while if you're white, and has never really caught on heavily on the top levels, but is certainly playable. And there's a DVD on it. I think there's a book. Cherniev and Raetsky may cover it in their book. Raetsky and somebody might cover it in their Benoni book, Benoni systems book, I think they call it, meaning everything that's not in the mainline Benonis. Anyway, let me show you what I wanted to say about all this. Okay, first of all, and did I put that game up? No, I didn't. Let me put a game up. Whoop, hang on, we'll get there. Yeah, I think this one first. Yeah, this answers the question more or less directly. The real problem with this move order right here, is that white hasn't committed to c4. Now, a lot of players are going to just play there anyway, and there's no reason why not. I mean, the Czech Benoni is not that fearsome. One interesting thing is that at least black now has more options. He hasn't played knight f6 first. Maybe he can play around with the move order a little bit. Not sure. It probably comes to roughly the same thing, but there may be other ways to think about putting your knight somewhere else or thinking about getting f5 in at some point. But there is an issue here, which is that after these moves, white doesn't have to play c4. White could play, for example, that move, or say e4 first. Let's play e4 first. And if black plays here or something, maybe white plays this move. I think that's an interesting move. The point being that once you put your pawn here, this bishop is blocked off. And so in this case, white gets an extra piece in development that he hasn't. c4 is a non-developing move. And he gets a chance to have more flexibility. And in particular, he has that c4 square for his pieces. So for example, you could set up a very standard setup for white here. And I'm not even saying white's better here, but I think now the other thing you do is you get rid of your bad bishop. I'm not so sure that's so important. It's not really that bad a piece, so I'm not so sure that's such a important idea here. And it helps black develop. So that's kind of a trade-off. I think white might be better in a position like this, but it's not completely easy. I think white's better anyway, I guess is what I was going to say. So that's one idea, just play bishop e5 check, but you can also play just developing moves, and then play for this this plan. Let me show you this idea, playing here. You might play a4 first, but the idea is to put your knight on the best square on the board. Remember, that's where that pawn was in the normal Czech Benoni. And I think this tends to be very nice. I mean, it's not, here's a typical example. Usually black plays that move anyway, with a couple ideas. One idea is to play there and there. The other idea is to play here and get rid of that bad bishop. Those are common ideas for black. I'm not saying they're the best moves. Both sides have plenty of ideas. White plays there. One idea is for white to play here to cover that b6 square. So when he plays knight c4, there's no knight b6 idea. So black might play that move. I'm not saying that's best. Maybe g6, who knows. And white advances, so you could just play knight c4. And I'm just showing this as an example there. And this kind of position, even though white has the sort of bad bishop and black has the good bishop, white has space, a beautiful sort of pseudo outpost support point on c4. And these dark squares are weak. And this is a good example. When you start simplifying, all of a sudden the advantages of space become more important. If white doesn't have any weaknesses and he has a space advantage, then the more pieces that come off, the more likely you are to win, for example, endgames or even sometimes middle games. And these extra dark square weaknesses are definitely a problem for black. I gave a quick example. I mean, probably black should just play very solidly here, and maybe even f6 or king h8 or something. But white's going to be able to organize f4 at some point, maybe with the rook over here. It's not a fun position, in my opinion, for black. The most important thing would be, well, what about just blasting through here? That was your idea anyway. But I think an interesting thing to look at here, it's not the only move, but I really like showing this. It's one reason I'm showing this example, is because that move really emphasizes the dark square weaknesses. Often you really, if you take, which is actually okay, there's always the possibility that if you play here, he'll go here, and maybe he won't stand that badly. He has the G file, and this particular position I kind of like white, but it's not that great. If you play this first, that's not an option. If you play f4 first, so always think of answering f5 with f4. And regardless of what black does, I mean, look at this. This attacks here. Maybe it even has the idea of this sometimes, and the idea of just taking and ruining black's pawn structure completely. So maybe here, and you could just play here, and it's hard to even find a move for black because of the various ideas of this. And white's going to have another rook coming over here. Things are kind of falling apart for black. And if he plays here, then you can take either way. I think that's an interesting way to take, though, because it turns out that this attacking here, and it turns out that this idea going here is actually not, and closing things up and winning that square doesn't really hold together very well, because you can counterattack on the other side of the board. Just for example, that move, and then h4, and break everything up. For example, something like, oh yeah, now just double and go here. Simple idea, and you've got space and pawn structure here. So what was this? So the Czech Benoni with e5. So you see, one of the problems, just to review that, is that is that white doesn't have to play c4. White can play knight here, as opposed to the Czech Benoni where black pretty much waited for him to play c4 first before he played these moves c5 and e5. Now the other question is very interesting. The other question, let me see about the Andrew Martin, DVD on Czech Benoni. Thank you very much. I couldn't remember that. Excellent idea. I think that's a chess-based DVD. Okay, yes, thank you, Big Karpov. And let me show you the other question that the same person asked, which I thought was a great question, because so many people are asking me about this move order anyway recently. This is a fun thing because so many recent ideas and even books and articles have been suggesting playing this way. So you'll see it all over the web, namely just this first move, which is c5. And now there are many different ways to play this. There are ways of playing this with the old, sort of like an old Indianish kind of style. There's all kinds of ways to play this, but there's different Benoni systems. Well, one of the favorite ones is to play things with knight here and here. You don't commit to e6 or e5 for a long time. That's been a very popular line recently. This kind of thing with. But if you play c5 first, it avoids certain problems. And so a lot of times people are getting, now white can play any number of things here, h3 and bishop d3 and all that, but the point is that black doesn't play this too fast, he plays. And this has been around forever, but it's a question of move orders. Black's got these new and sophisticated move orders that he plays. And so this question is very relevant. c5 is often the way that you get to that at the same time avoiding other variations. I mean, if nothing else, you avoid things like certain kinds of Londons and Trompovskys, right? And you've also committed to having the knight here, and that causes other issues. Whereas if you play this first and white plays d5, you might be happy to at least you have some further options. But the question here was, what about just this move, taking? And I thought to myself, oh, this is nothing because black will just play e6 and recapture the pawn. And I started looking at the theory of this, and it's just fascinating. You could go on forever. In fact, that's one problem. I've got notes that go on forever, but I'm not going to use them. I just wanted to point out that this, well, I mean, what else can you do here? You can play something like this, but then your queen gets a little misplaced. I don't know what the best way to do this is, but that's really not where you want your queen. A move like that, it's like a good Sicilian for white. There's not even knight b5 and knight d5 ideas. You got to be really careful here as black. And knight a6, it's always a little awkward to put the knight here early. I won't go into that. But the most obvious thing to do is just play e6. And now let me make that my main move, knight c3, because we're going to try and go into a Sicilian-like position. But the other way to do that is to play here right away. And he takes here. And then now there's some funny things going on. This transposes to the line we're about to look at. And this move is quite funny. It's actually a position that's kind of known, but it's one move behind. And let me show you how that often comes up. It's actually Sicilian defense, and it comes up this way. There's a little book recently about this system as black, playing the sales system. I think it's called Basman Sales. It used to be called. This position is known, and one of the moves white can make here. It's not very common, but it's not that terrible. It's just to play here. Looks a little odd, but so is that move. It is a little odd. So there we've got the exact same position, so that's kind of funny. Anyway, in our order, that would go, that would go here, here, here. And then I think black should move, try to move fairly quickly. I think probably black, in order to avoid some sort of disadvantage here, might want to just play this move right away. At least it seemed plausible to play that way. Because white has to decide how to defend this. Well, it looks fine. You just play a simple move like that, for example, so you don't block off your bishop, and you're threatening maybe to go here and here, winning another tempo. But black goes here, and now white really has to defend that. He can't allow knight, move like knight g4, knight e4 even now, sorry, it's very strong. And knight g4 is threatened anyway. So probably he's going to play there, so if knight g4, you can just castle, no problem. But then black breaks in the center. And this position, it seems to me, is pretty decent for black. It's okay for both sides, because white has just a normal game, but so does black. White plays here probably because he's kind of a little behind in development, and at least that's with tempo. But maybe black gets a piece out and stops it at the same time. And this is just a sort of typical isolated pawn position. I don't think either side is particularly better here. Both sides have chances here. I wouldn't be scared to be black here at all, though. So So the main line I'm looking at here is, yeah, pawn sacrifice. You know, I still haven't seen that. I think it's on Netflix now, though, so I can see it if I want to. Chess doesn't make good movies. That's probably true. I thought The Illusion Defense was pretty good. The one with Emily Watson and Turturro was a pretty good movie. And the best all-time chess movie, in my opinion, it's a little hard to get, but the English translation is Brainwashed. It's basically Stefan Zweig's Royal Game book, often called The Royal Game. It's actually, all these have different names. I mean, this book has been called several things before, several different kinds of things, but it's by Stefan Zweig, who is a very famous Austrian author who died young of, I think, scarlet fever, I think, in South America. And it's the English translation, the one that I have anyway, is called Brainwashed, and there's also a movie about it. And the movie is with Kurt Jürgens, I think. It's a German movie, so it's subtitled, but it's a wonderful movie. It's just fantastic. You have to sort of dig it up. These days you can find almost anything, right? And I have an old VCR copy of this movie. I don't know if I ever, maybe I got it onto DVD at some point, so I don't know how to get it, but it should be around somehow. Brainwashed with Kurt Jürgen. It's a German movie. Best chess movie ever, I think. So, very old. Anyway, what do we have here? We have, oh yeah, I was going to show you this line. So I think knight c3 makes more sense if you're going to play e4. Now you also have this interesting idea of playing knight here, with the idea of just attacking this and attacking here. And there's all sorts of fun ideas here. I think if black tries something like this, well, he can play this way. He's played this way before. There are actually quite a few games with all this stuff, but I think this position favors white because of the bishops. You can just play bishop f4 or bishop d2. And black's king's a little exposed, but more importantly, you have these two bishops, and eventually that'll be good for you. So black has also played this move. And here, and the only disadvantage of this one, the only problem with this move is that white has this idea, let me make sure, yeah, white has this idea of playing e4 here, which is kind of cool. If he didn't have e4, the knights would be as good as the bishops, because black would have a 2-to-1 central majority, a little lead in development, very aggressively place pieces, and just play e5. But since you have the move e4, black can't really get his center going, so the bishops might be worth a little something. The critical line is to just take that. That's actually the best move, I think, because this, which looks so strong, isn't completely clear. I still think white has a small advantage here. If black doesn't take that, I just show you. If black doesn't take that, you just take, and you have two bishops in any sort of end game or even middle game, and white's just better. Even though black has a little lead in development, it's not good enough. Here, probably the best move is just this. You can't really afford to weaken your king side, and then white can play this move bishop here. And I think white's just a little bit better here. h5 is pretty much forced, I think. And then white can play here, h4, and then it turns out maybe this is the easiest or best move. You can also actually get a small advantage just taking. These are very small advantages. Black can play this way, but wouldn't be much fun, I don't think. I'd rather be white in this kind of ending with the bishops. Not that it's easy, because black can play like here, f5, e5, try to play maybe even g5, f4, these kinds of things. So it's a game. It's not a huge advantage, but not my idea of a lot of fun. So what's interesting is what that means is maybe this move d5 isn't as good as playing knight f6, challenging the knight, and after knight takes check, and don't commit that pawn to e5 yet. So now white can do a bunch of things, but the same position is no longer simple. You don't have the move e4 anymore. So black has development. He still has the move d5 coming, and e5. And I have some sample lines here, but then we'd use up the entire day. But you get the idea. There's all kinds of fun, interesting things happening for both sides. Most of them, in my opinion, are about equal. I think they're mostly about equal, these positions. So here we have this move. Black just develops. The whole point of e4 and knight c3 is that now this move, which would have worked against knight f3 because of e5, knight g4, doesn't work because g4 is covered. So he plays knight c6 first, and now he can play knight f6. And I think it's equal, but it's interesting. One thing he could try just this move, and maybe queen c7 is the best move now. You could also play a6. I think if this, maybe white could argue that he can try for a little advantage. He has the bishops, and black can't ruin the pawn structure. So this might be just a tiny advantage for white. But queen c7 is probably a better move, just here. And looking at the king side, castles, probably a6. You could even think about this, and if h3 here, but probably just here. And these positions should be fine for black, I think. Okay, so what else do we have here? Oh yeah, okay, so that was basically the line I was looking at. I showed, bishop e2 instead. This position is very interesting and very typical. You're going to get this in other openings too. Queen's Gambit type things, and maybe not the Queen's Gambit so much, the French defense, some other openings, where it looks like white's got good play against this, and in a way he does have better play than if his pawn was on c3, because he's got his pieces out. On the other hand, it's been very slow, and that development's very slow, and so black should be okay here by just developing. And in fact, if black were worried about this position, he could just play here too, no problem, because the bishop isn't here to support rook e1 check, or out here where it covers more squares. So this position turns out to be basically equal. But white can play this way. It's fine. I mean, you've got your pieces out, and and that is an isolated pawn. It's just that black is pretty active, and that gives him plenty of play. So, okay, that's the d takes c5 line. Now, how are we doing with the chat here? We're not getting many chat issues here. I hope you're not bored to death with this. I can just keep moving on, but it'd probably be good to get a little bit of a chat response here if anybody has anything going on. What are your favorite movies? What were the answers to those questions? What are some other chess movies? The Illusion Defense, of course. That's the one I mentioned with Emily Watson and John Turturro. And what are some chess movies? I'll bet John Hartman knows some chess movies. There's a lot that have chess in them. Well, there's the Thomas Crown Affair has the wonderful chess scene. There's a lot of famous chess scenes, and as someone already mentioned, Space Odyssey, the Space Odyssey scene. Maybe they did mention it. And Russia with Love has a famous scene too. But movies that are dedicated to chess, yeah, generally probably haven't been all that good. but there are a bunch of them out there. I don't know if everybody saw the Queen. I think it was called The Queen, or The Queen's Sacrifice, or something like that. The French movie that came out a couple of years ago. It was more of a psychological thriller. It didn't have that much to do with chess, but it was kind of fun anyway. And then there was a movie that was sort of based on Fischer Spassky, of a Western guy playing a Spassky-like Russian, and maybe 15 years ago, that actually was quite well done, and I can't think of the name of it. Any suggestions from out there? I'm not getting much chat today. I guess Alex Yermolinsky, when he isn't getting much chat, starts yelling at everybody to give him chats. So I don't think I'll do that. But here we go. 3 moves to freedom. Ah, interesting. Interesting. The movie I was talking about, the Brainwash movie. Okay, the Stefan Zweig novel, the Royal Game movie. Good. Yeah, I strongly recommend that. It's just great. It's such a classic. It's such a classic. And really classic actors. Oh, what's her name is in it? The famous German woman who was just a marvelous actress over years. Can't think of her name though. You'll see if you get the movie. I think it's fun, and I'll promise to try and see Pawn Sacrifice at some point. So, what do people think of Pawn Sacrifice? Does anybody like it? Need some chat participation here, folks. Deadly silence. Maybe my sound's off. Okay. Anyway, let me. I can continue here. There's a question I've been sort of stalling on for a while, that because it was so complicated. Yeah, let me put that up. That I gave sort of a partial answer to, but then every week there seemed to be more important things to do, or more easier things to do. And that has to do with this question about what to do when you play the moves against d4. What do you do against the moves knight f? When you play knight f6 and e6, what do you do against London systems? And the original question was Kali systems. Well, let's just look at this. Kali systems, which would be like this, and with knight f3 and here, and we answered that one. And Trompovsky's and Tori's, and we talked about the Trompovsky. I've got another game today, where if you play e6, what are some of your options here against the Trompovsky? And then the London systems with e6 and c5. And the London systems can happen either after this or after bishop f4 first. It doesn't really matter much if you're playing e6. So here's a game. Just it's not a full answer, but it sort of shows you what people have been doing and some sort of interesting things that can happen. Ooh, Evans Gambit, that'd be fun. Yeah, that'd be great. I can show you some things right now. I don't know if we have time, but let's do this first. Here's a game that I thought might be interesting. Whoops, for some reason it's not working. Why is that? Oh, because I didn't get the game on. Oh, 262, excuse me. I didn't put up the right game. There we go. Okay, so here's the just a direction to go in, a possible direction to go in. There's a lot of things you can do against London systems, but if you play these moves, which is what the original question was, here's something you can do as black, is play that move right away, early b6. And of course white has a bunch of moves here. This is in this game he played bishop d3. If he plays this move there, which you've probably seen quite a bit, and black plays here, the most recent thing that white's been doing here is this, to kind of mess up the queen side. And I don't think it's really that dangerous. The idea is to play here, then play a5, and if he takes it, play knight c4. And for example, right now, if you play it too quickly, I think we just take that. And then if here, you can play d5, because you've stopped knight c4. So this position is pretty easy, because if he plays here, his knight gets trapped on the side of the board, and that's not good. In fact, I think he might even lose that piece. Did he lose that piece? It doesn't look good anyway. It's not something you want. I think it wins a piece. But the same idea is what White's had. White has played this several times actually. This idea of playing knight here first, and then and now you really should probably take care of the a5 idea by playing there. And you could also play bishop b7. There's nothing wrong with that. And here. Now one idea of this position I wanted to point out is the thing that has bothered, notice white play bishop d3 here. Actually white plays a5 anyway, and black just ignores it, plays there. And comes out fine. Black's got good development. So this is fine for black. I was going to say that one of the ideas is this knight e5 move is always what bothers people as black. But if you haven't committed the knight here, and you haven't played bishop here, then you can always challenge that knight in the center. And just for example, you can bring this knight back. That's a move worth remembering against a knight here. That's a move that's worth thinking about. It's an easy way to sort of get rid of those pieces in the center. You take it, and then you attack it again, and you get rid of the next piece that goes there. So white wouldn't do that probably. White would play something probably like this, is sort of the standard idea. And now, after a move like this, you've got plenty of time to simply take that. And if he goes here, you can just challenge him. So usually he takes with a pawn. But if he takes with a pawn, you just go here. And there's no way there's no mating attack here because there aren't enough pieces over there to support anything. In the meantime, this is a little bit weak here, this piece. So black's doing quite well here. Black has one other idea here too, which is that forgetting f6s and things in the center, there's also getting the knight around that way, covering these key squares, which is an easy equalizer. Okay, just make sure you aren't getting mated in these positions, and in this one you really aren't. So white did an odd thing there. He combined a4 with the normal bishop d3 plan, but just to show you that. Now let's look at the game. The game went there, and he goes into a more normal looking kind of position. That move is usually played to prevent the knight from chasing down the bishop. Okay, white still is thinking about not playing c3 yet because he wants to get e4 in for free. So black takes it and plays there. And here's the structure I was talking about. This is actually pretty easy to play for black. It's 2-to-1 in the center, which is good. And what's bad is that, of course, white has more space. So it's kind of just a trade-off. And by the way, people have also played, even at cost of tempo, believe it or not, they've played this move and done okay. I think if I was going to play bishop a6, though, I'd probably play it earlier. I would tend to play this earlier, just for the record. So in this game, just to show you what happened, there's your standard sort of London-y setup. And here's something worth remembering too, this idea of rook e8 and bishop e8, and you're going to play for e5 sometimes. But you also just have a hedgehog position with a6, rook c8, queen c7, those kinds of moves. So here he tries to play for a5, and a good answer to that is a6. Now recently I've noticed a whole bunch of games where actually black just gives up this square because it gives him some extra space there on the queen side. Maybe not in this exact position, but in these kinds of positions. And yeah, maybe queen c7. I think bishop f8 is probably the move I'd recommend here right away. Get all those moves in before you decide what you want to do with your queen. And how'd this game? There was a game with queen c2. And now the best thing to do is play g6, because eventually this bishop might go here, and also it cuts off everything going this way. So it means if you ever play e5, there's nothing coming in on the f5 square. So g6 is a very handy move. You notice white has no attack in these positions at all. The only problem with lines like this, of course, is if white wants to, doesn't have to commit to doing anything. He's not going to get mated or anything like that. So, but that's the way it is in chess. If white plays slowly, you're probably not going to get, slowly and logically and carefully, you can't expect to get a big advantage or any sort of attacking chances if white's being really cautious like this. So that's an answer. That's a setup that white could use against the London, I think. Schock Novella, thank you. That's the original name in German. Excellent, Schock Novella, wonderful. And let me see, Brainwash is apparently a movie version. Yeah, that's of Schock Novella, which is the royal game in English. English translation goes by the name of chess. Well, the usual one is Brainwashed, I think, you'll find. Original German, which I read it in the original German, and as well as the English. It is more elegant, but it's a good read. Yes, I think the translation was pretty decent. Very good. Thank you, Per Eric. Carrie's Defense. Oh, I get some. Whoa! All of a sudden, I got some questions here. Brooklyn Castle's excellent. That's a great little. It's kind of a documentary. Yeah, if you get a chance to look at Brooklyn Castle, which I think is also on some of the main streaming services. So, Evan's Gambit would be fun. I'll get that next time. Because obviously that's a big answer, and we're already well past the hour. Carrie's Defense. Bishop b7 with a3, okay, for black. Yeah, I've never seen that called the Carrie's Defense. It usually calls the English Defense, at least these days. There's quite a few books on it. I've played it myself quite a lot, actually. Like white is slightly better, but it could be played at the highest level. Well, that's what most people would say, is that white's slightly better. Let me show you something about that. Yeah, in my repertoire book for white, that's the system I give. I give the A3 lines for white, which are very popular. I give these lines, these D5s with G3s and all that stuff. Now you can't really play this. I think if you play just with that, it's not as easy, but you could play that. It's Queen's Indian like. Normally what white does is plays D5 first and then plays like Knight F3 and G3. So this would be like the main line. And I don't think most people who play this as black are scared of this position. They're more scared of the lines where white plays E4 on the third move. That's a scarier line for most people. But at the same time, I always thought white was exactly what you said. I think you're absolutely right. I think white is just slightly better positionally, but I think he has to play D5. And let me just think about that. If you play this without D5, I guess one thing is you can go back into the Petrosian Queen's Indian with that move. That's just basically your Petrosian Queen's Indian position after takes. And that's considered fine for black. Okay, so that's one issue right there. And if he doesn't take it, well, the bishop's not even out yet. Well, there are other moves here. A lot of things have been played here. This is a Petrosian Queen's Indian. In other words, this is just, well, I won't show you that because of the time, but it's very easy. If you look at the Queen's Indian defense, you can get this position against the move 4A3. It's one of the main lines. So that's probably why this is more interesting for white if he wants to get an advantage. And I think white probably does get a tiny advantage. I have a lot of analysis of this in my Mastering the Chess openings, but mainly in my, I'm sorry, this is not in Strategic Opening Repertoire for white. This is in Mastering the Chess openings. I have a lot of analysis of this. That'd be volume 2. And, wait, no, I'm sorry. Strategic Chess Opening Repertoire, I guess I don't give the E4 line. This is terrible. My memory's terrible. It is in Strategic Chess Opening Repertoire that I give these lines because they're strategic, because they aren't tactical. The E4 lines tend to be more tactical. So yeah, if you want to get my Strategic Opening Repertoire for white book, I give a lot of stuff on this line. And I think it's slightly better for white, but on the other hand, black can definitely play it. There's some very cute ideas for black that I think are really, really clever. Like, let me see if I can show you. After the D5 line, for example, in a position like this, One interesting idea for black is to play like this kind of move, probably Knight F3 first, is to play this way. It looks ridiculous, but it's kind of got a different different look to it without weakening yourself with g6. And just for example, I'll show you something really weird you can do here. You can play this move. Isn't that odd? The idea is to put your knight here, or maybe take this next, and then play knight d6. Because then you're on this square, but you're also on that weakness on c4. Very silly, but I like silly lines. This is a silly way to play. What else we got on the chat here? So the question is it okay for black? I'd say yes. And I think it can be played on the highest level even, but probably won't be too much. Partly because white has other options of more aggressive lines to play than the a3 line. The whole line, though, is a lot of fun. The English defense lines are a lot of fun. So just for the record, what we were just looking at there is here, 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 here. It's a book by Odesky on the English defense. There's also there's one by King and Spielman, I think. MacDonald maybe has one. Those are old. The Odesky book is not that old. It's probably maybe 6-7 years old, but that's fairly recent in terms of English defense theory. Most books that have a repertoire will have a section on this, and there are things like Davies has a DVD that includes the English defense. Tony Miles used to play it famously. Nigel Short played it, and I'm trying to think who else. And it's still playable, unquestionably. So very, very fun line. And okay, there's nothing else in the chat right now, and anything else would probably take a little too long. Looks like Queen's Indian positions, exactly. It is very Queen's Indian-y. Short definitely played it, yes. And I'm trying to think who else, some of the more famous. Vaganyan played it. Who are some of the better known players? A lot of strong players have played it, usually just a few times. So, Nakamura. Nakamura's played it several times and done well with it. And that's just recently. So it's still out there. But you do have to kind of know what you're doing. So, and then the famous line. Oh, that's the idea, that it's not the Queen's Indian. It doesn't have to be like a Queen's Indian because you don't have to play here. So f5 is a big theme. If white plays slowly, there's a tendency for f5 to be the move. If white just makes sort of random moves, there's a tendency for black to go into this kind of thing. That's sort of the idea, like a bird's reversed or something like that. And so yeah, that's the idea of playing these moves before knight f6, is to have more flexibility. And one of the original ideas was to play this line for black, which is if this move to play here. And it turns out that white gets a huge attack after that, although there's still clever things that people haven't completely exhausted. And the other idea is that after that you play here and since knight f6 isn't in yet, you're still getting pressure on that square. And now after that move, that's a particularly good answer, because now it turns out there's no counterplay here against this. There's nothing else you can do. Black's just winning that rook. Whereas in the other position, this one, white can famously take here because this position here, this check here, now the king can't move because of check and takes, and the king doesn't have this square, so he has to play here. And then there's this long famous variation, which goes like this, and the idea is that if check, you just take and take back. So that's sort of the thought. And you don't actually take here, you play this move usually. It's very odd, and usually this. And then there's a big choice to make about whether to put your knight on that square or whether to go here first. Most people play knight e2 here now. There's a lot of theory on these lines, an awful lot of theory on these lines. Some people think this is a forced win for white. It's not totally clear. For a while, people were kind of holding on with that. I don't believe that works, actually. I don't think it's good enough. But you can see it's an incredibly dangerous attack. So that's if you don't want to play that way for black, which you probably don't. If you are going to play there, you probably should throw this move in to give your king a square. And now, since you're threatening bishop takes, white has to go here. And this is considered better for white also, but at least it's interesting. There's a lot of crazy things going on here. I actually lost a game with white in this position a long time ago against a master. And so I've always thought it was a little bit, more dangerous than maybe it's supposed to be. White is, at least he's won that pawn. White is better here if white plays carefully, but it's not as easy as the books maybe make it look like. All right. Let me see. Show the following rooks. Oh, there it is. Yeah, the rook sacrifice we talked about. Yeah, that's just a little background on that line. And so basically people don't play f5 anymore in that position, hardly ever. And for some reason the same old person is obsessed about going here, here, and here. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you have eyes, you can see what moves are being made. This is a visual lesson. It would make no sense to name every move. It would make no sense at all, actually, I don't think. So I don't know. You keep bringing that point up. In any case, I'm not going to change, so you'll just have to live with it. I don't understand how you could possibly have a problem with looking at the moves. It doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, naming what move it is not particularly useful. And you've got a chart there too. You have the moves up on the screen there. If you want to see what the moves are called, they're right up there. So I'm not sure what the problem is, but I think we've exhausted that subject in any case. All right, folks, thanks everybody for coming on. And I hope we got through, at least we got through a lot of the old questions. We didn't do too much chat this time. Hopefully you come next time. Either send me those questions or bring a few of them to the chat and we can have some fun with them. I will do the Evans Gambit and maybe a few other leftover things that we had from before. But the good thing about today is at least we got through a lot of the questions that have been hanging around for a long time. And I want to thank you for listening and send me some questions. Ask I Am Watson at chessclub.com and tune in next week. Thank you.